He is a National Geographic Traveler of the Year, an international best-selling author, and a founder of his language and travel blog called Fluent in 3 months. So at the age of 21, while only speaking English, he decided to embark on world travels all over the globe that has spanned almost 2 decades, and that pretty much involved never speaking English outside of English-speaking countries. Oh my goodness, so impressive. He's fluent in over 6 languages, has dabbled in countless others, and he is here today to teach us how he got to this point and share with us some tips and tricks how we can do the same, hopefully. So Benny, I will turn it on over to you. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here, and I'll be very happy to give you guys some encouragement. So I got a lovely little presentation for you that I'm going to give, but before I dive into that, I will mention that I have some travels coming up, and I might be able to see you guys. And actually, on the Nomadic network, they've been kind enough to share my events, so you'll actually see them there. So if you happen to be in, let's see, I'm going to be in Oklahoma City. I'm going to be in St. Louis. I'll be in Memphis for Matt's conference, of course. I'll be in Little Rock, and then I'm going to be doing another big tour when I'm going to go through Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota, Montana. By the end of it, I'll have seen 43 states, which is pretty impressive for a non-American, especially. We don't tend to see that many. And then after that, I'll be in Toronto very briefly, and I'll head on down to Brazil. So I got loads of travels coming up. I am definitely a nomad myself, and I hope I'll run into you guys. You'll see all my events shared on the Nomadic Network's events page. But yeah, that being said, let's dive right on in. So in case you don't know me, let me see. I can actually match my camera up here. I can mimic the same pose. No, the hand's the other way. Something like that. Okay. Anyway, this is me. I am from Ireland. I have been traveling since 2003. And like Laura said, I essentially do not speak English when I'm not in an English-speaking country, and it has completely transformed my experience in the world. And I would love to share that with you. And feel free to ask your questions. We'll get to them at the end. But the kind of things that I've done, I mean, the first mission that I blogged about was that I learned enough Czech to have conversations in a couple of months. I was already in Brazil before this trip, so I speak fluent Portuguese. I've learned even languages like Hungarian that people imagine to be harder languages. And I've had very intensive projects to sit advanced exams in languages like German. So I've got pretty good experiences, and I'm gonna reduce my advice down to the 3 biggest differences that I see between successful and unsuccessful language learners. Because when I was getting started, I imagined I don't have this natural talent. I could only speak English when I was 21, and I actually moved to Spain for 6 months, and I did not learn Spanish. This is not something that just came to me naturally. I gravitated towards other English speakers, and that meant that I was just like a lot of us tend to do. I was in the other country, and I met people who spoke English in that country, but I didn't get that deep of an immersive experience. So we always imagine, like, you know, if you go to the country, then just breathing in Spanish air, you would exhale español perfectísimo, and it doesn't work like that. Unfortunately, I wish just being in the country would solve your problems, but that is not what I want to talk about today. Like, travel is something we're all passionate about, but I want to encourage you guys. I want to encourage you guys to. Sorry, I'm hearing sound coming from you there, Laura. I want to encourage you guys to try to learn the language before you go to the country, so that you have an advantage while you're there. Okay, so are you guys seeing me okay? I could see you're saying my screen's fine. Hope I'm not getting cut off or anything like that. All right, so the 3 biggest differences that you will find in language learners are these three things that I want to talk about today. There is no precise language learning approach. There are no goals and no directions, and there's no accountability. So, like whittling it down, these are the three biggest differences that I would say separate successful from non-successful language learners. So, yeah, definitely. Let's dive in and see what I mean by that. So the language learning approach, well, what we're all used to is studying. We imagine the way you get fluent in a language is pick up a grammar book and study the hell out of it and go from chapter 1 to chapter 40 and do exercises and go to your traditional academic lessons that we're all being used to. I took German in school for 5 years. I had nothing to show at the end of it. So yeah, the studying, it doesn't work. Like the best analogy I can think of is imagine you were learning how to ride a bike, and instead, like the method you decided you were going to do that would be to study aerodynamics and to study like the construction of a bicycle. And obviously that's not how we learn how to ride a bike. We learn by putting our ass on a saddle and pedaling and falling down a few times. So this is what I want you to think about when it comes to other languages, that we don't want it to be study focused. The academic approach is just not proven to actually work with languages. And it's because we can't think of a language as just pure information. This isn't like your history or your geography, where the more facts you have in your brain, the better you are at the language. You can't think of it like that. It's a much more of a practical, experiential thing, and that's what I want to get you away from. That's why my key advice is you got to speak from day one. Whatever language you're learning, I don't care how different it is. I don't care how difficult you think it is, and I don't care how bad a language learner you imagine yourself to be. You have to speak from day one. Day one does not mean day one of you being in the country. So if you have a ticket to Thailand in November, then the day you arrive, I don't mean that that's day one. I mean that right now you have to decide, I am going to start speaking Thai from the middle of nowhere, Kansas, that I'm currently at, or wherever you guys are. I am going to start speaking the language right now so that when I arrive in the country, I already have momentum. So speak from day one is crucial. You have to have an approach that is spoken focused. So when I say speak from day one, this surprises people. They meant like, how can you do this, especially if I'm not in the country yet? And I do that via calls. So I find teachers online who are very affordable, especially for some language combinations, because they're in their own country where you can leverage currency differences. And it's not that expensive to have one-on-one time with somebody. So I would call and I would have a lesson and I would book that lesson for immediately. And yes, it's going to be hard. You're going to have so many words you don't know. And I just tell people, you have to accept you're going to sound like Tarzan. You're going to sound like the caveman version of Spanish. Yo querer supermercado ir. And you're just like piecing one word after the other that is grammatically like nonsense. But if I said to you, I want supermarket go, then you know what I'm saying. Like you're not going to, if somebody came up to you in the street and said something like that to you, you're not going to say, oh, where is your preposition, man? And you clearly aren't conjugating that verb correctly. I refuse to tell you where the supermarket is until you ask me that question properly. That's not something you're going to do. And that's also not something people in other countries do. So communication has to be your goal. That is what a language is. A language is a means of communication. It is not a list of facts and grammar rules that you have to memorize and cram. It is a means for you to talk to somebody. So you can talk to somebody with imperfect language. And that's why I say speak from day one. All right. So this is an example of like, this is a screenshot I have of italki. This is one of the resources. I'm going to give you a big list of some of my favorite resources. And italki is a site that connects you with native teachers. So you can see, because I have a lot of languages to practice. I got my German, my Irish, my Italian, my French, different teachers at different times. And I will talk to them because right this second I'm in America, I want to make sure I'm practicing my languages ahead of my travels. So this is what I use, and I connect with them. I can coordinate the right timing, and then I have a conversation with them. For my weakest languages, it's a struggle, but for my better languages, it's a chance to push them up even more. And that is the resource I would recommend for you. So speaking is hard. It takes you out of your comfort zone. This is me actually on the Nile trying to speak Egyptian Arabic. And this lady is actually a teacher that I found on italki. I practiced with her. I was actually in Brazil while I was learning Arabic, a very weird combination for you there. But I practiced with her daily. And then I met up with her when I was in Cairo and made a little video for YouTube and all that stuff. So you can eventually start to speak to these people, but it's going to be hard. I do not have the easy way to learn language. The easy way is to take that dopey yellow box you see in airports called Rosetta Stone. Absolute waste of time, by the way. But that is the easy way, because you can just lay back and just click buttons of like these 4 images that they show you. You don't even have to think. That is the easy way. It's not a very effective way. The effective way to learn language is hard. You are going to feel like an idiot. And I embrace that. I accept this is going to be a process where I am a moron. For the next few months, I am not going to be able to debate Kantian epistemology. If that's something I really want to do, unfortunately, I'm going to have to wait on that. I'm going to be talking about what I did this weekend, or I'm going to be talking about I like pizza. And I have to accept that for a few months, these are the levels of conversations I have, because it's an investment. When you get your momentum, you have more and more complex conversations. So this is the biggest tip I would give for you. You have to speak from day one. All right. Next question, next point out of the 3 big ones that make a difference is the lack of precision. So as you can imagine, my website, it gets like between 1 and 2 million visitors a month, Fluent in 3 months. But the time we get the most traffic, I see a giant spike in my Google Analytics on January 1st, because everyone's suddenly like, I want to learn Spanish. And I try to direct them to articles that are going to help them solve that problem. But realistically, if that is their goal, if their goal is simply just, I want to learn Spanish, then honestly, they're very likely to fail, because this lacks all sorts of precision. And you don't have anything to push you forward in that. There's no end point. You could be learning Spanish for decades and have nothing to show for it. Like I have a situation that I'm sure is similar for many of you guys, that I took German for 5 years in high school. At the end of it, I could barely order a train ticket when I finally made it to Germany the first time. And that 5 years, you would think, well, clearly, some people just have a natural talent for languages, because I spent 5 years and I have nothing to show for it. But did I really spend 5 years on German? No. 5 years passed, and during that 5-year period, I sat in a classroom where a teacher with an Irish accent told me how German worked and explained in English all about German, and I had to zip it while he did all the talking. And that was like an hour or 2 a week. So, it sounds like we all like to say, oh, I studied Spanish for years and I have nothing to show for it. The years don't matter. The hours matter. How many minutes and hours did you put into that language that you were truly dedicated? I wasn't dedicated during my German lessons. I didn't care. I just wanted to get a grade to get into university. So it doesn't really mean anything that I spent 5 years on learning German. So we need to change that. And this is where the SMART method, I'm sure you guys have seen come up in so many branches of life for efficiency to do things. The SMART method is extremely applicable to language learning. So it has to be specific, the goals. If you're thinking of like a 90-day challenge, which is a theme I'll be talking about, because obviously fluent in 3 months comes from somewhere. In case you're wondering, there's no magic number. 3 months isn't a very special term. It's just very simply because, like a lot of you guys, I travel. And because I travel, 3 months tends to be the tourist visa limit. So that's simply, in case you're wondering, where does the 3 months and fluent in 3 months come from? That's where it comes from. I had 3 months to learn a language when I was traveling through the country. I've adjusted that, and since more recent years, I actually learn before I go to the country. But while I was doing my most intensive travels, the 3 months was the time limit I simply had externally applied to me. But you need a time limit. The resolutions don't have a time limit, or they kind of imply maybe by the end of the year. That's too much. A year is too distant a time span. You need to be pushing yourself a little bit more in terms of a few months. 3 months is kind of a good Goldilocks zone where it's enough time that you can genuinely make a lot of progress. You can really push yourself. Whereas if you just did 1 month, you can't make as much progress in 1 month. But if you did like 9 months, it's so far in the future that you could just leave it till later. And this is what we do with resolutions. It's like, oh, I got the whole year to learn Spanish. And right now I'm kind of busy. I need to watch Better Call Saul. You know, I'm really need to see that latest episode. So your priorities kind of get shifted and you lose things. So specificity, have a specific goal, whatever that may be. That is what you want to aim for. What about measurable? So one thing that I do with people that I help with my like who join my community, and I coach them to learn languages, is we try to get them to have a 15-minute conversation. That's their goal. At the end of 3 months, they're aiming for a 15-minute conversation. So that is one example of something you could think of, like a conversation where you could talk about anything that you would in under social circumstances. So you're not debating philosophy, you're just having a conversation. It has to be achievable. So you try it with, like in our challenge, we make sure that we have people who are aiming with realistic goals in mind. A 15-minute conversation kind of gives you that wiggle room that you can have a 15-minute basic conversation or a 15-minute advanced conversation. It has to be relevant to you. So for a lot of us who are into travel, conversation is what this is all about. I don't really talk about necessarily passing exams, being able to write a book in the language, or even to a certain degree, you don't necessarily need to be able to read the language. If your goal is to travel to the country and to converse with people, speaking has to be your priority. And this is where a lot of us miss out on. We imagine, well, there are 4 pillars in language learning. There's speaking and reading and listening and writing. And we figure, I got to put effort into all 4 of those. But that is the academic mindset. That's if you are, you know, maybe if you're going to be working as a professional in the country and you want to study at university there, absolutely, you've got to focus on all of those. But for the most part, we want to make friends with people in the country. And that means we have to be focusing on speaking. So it has to be relevant. And then the time bound, like I said, is 90 days. So keep all of this in mind. This gives specificity to your target. And when it comes to where you're actually aiming, this is a chart here that I refer to quite a lot with people. In Europe, we have something called the European Common Framework. And this is agreed upon for every major European language, that this is what we understand as very specific levels of your language proficiency. So in a nutshell, A is beginner, B is intermediate, C is advanced. And within that, you have 1 for lower and 2 for upper. And fluency is actually a lot easier, a lot more within reach than you might think. Fluency for me is right here at the B2 level. So the B2 level, I can essentially function like I would in my mother tongue in social situations. The C levels are doing more professional things. I've got a degree in electronic engineering, so I would be able to work as an engineer at the C levels. But I don't need that for the most part. When I'm traveling in a country, especially nowadays that you can work online and bring your work with you, you don't necessarily need to work as a professional in the country. But the B2 level is what I try to aim for. And the great thing about this is you can be fluent in the language in terms of going down to the pub, having a drink with your friends. They can talk to one another at regular speed. This is what fluency is. But you still have an accent. You still make the odd mistake. Now, I have reached the C2 level in a couple of my languages. I've worked as a professional translator, and I've worked as an engineer in French and Spanish. But to be honest, that has been less applicable to my day-to-day life as it has for my B2 levels. So the great thing is you don't have to worry about perfection. Get rid of perfection. Perfectionism is your enemy. You want to have a specific goal that you're aiming for, where B2 is that goal. It's like very well defined for a lot of languages, but essentially it's social equivalency. Things that you could do in your social life, that's what you want to aim for. Understanding that you'll still have an accent and make the odd mistake. And that takes so much pressure off, because when we're perfectionists, then it's essentially impossible, because you'll never reach perfection. I don't even have perfection in English. Like when I started going out with an American girl, she told me, you know, are you wearing your wife beater today? And I was like, wife beater? I would never do such a thing. And I didn't know that this is actually an item of clothing, because this is something Americans say. We don't say that in Ireland. So like, does that mean because I didn't know that word, does that mean that I don't speak English? Of course not. Imperfection is a part of this process. You will never know everything about the language. And that's why I say, accept that. If that's true for your native tongue, it can be true for your target language as well. All right. The timeline, I already mentioned that the 3 months, I feel is the sweet spot. It's just enough to really push yourself that you can see the target on the horizon, but at the same time, it gives you enough time that you can make lots of progress. All right. The third big difference that I found between successful and unsuccessful language learners is accountability. So when I started my blog, Fluent in 3 months, the main reason wasn't just to, you know, maybe grow a business. I eventually thought about that, of like, oh, wow, a lot of people are reading this. I could turn this into a business. That wasn't actually my goal when I started the blog. I started the blog for accountability, because before the blog, I'd been traveling for, I think, 6 years. And I had my own personal language projects that I would kind of tell myself, oh, yeah, I want to learn this language in this amount of time. And I didn't really have to show anybody how I was doing. And this took a lot of the pressure off, that if I was only very mildly successful, then it didn't really matter. But when I started publicly sharing my projects on my blog, the pressure was on. Because on those days when I was thinking, do you know what? I'm tired. I don't really feel like studying today, or I don't feel like getting a language lesson. You know, who cares? I'm just going to watch TV in English. Then I would have that reminder, oh, you can't really do that, Benny, because you promised your blog you're going to upload a YouTube video of your progress this weekend. So you should really do that. You should really get into work. So you need that extra external pressure that you get from having accountability. One way you can do that is social media. This is a friend of mine who created a separate account just to upload in French and to follow people in French. I personally, this is, I'm kind of an extreme case here, but I personally have 14 TikTok accounts, 14 Instagram accounts, and 14 Twitter accounts, and also 14 YouTube accounts, because each one of them, they nowadays they've made it very straightforward that you don't need to even log out and log back in. On all of these social media, they have an option that when you generally you hold your profile image, and it gives you an option for switch between accounts. So I do that when I'm in Spanish mode. I switch to my Spanish accounts, and I consume content in that account. When I feel up for it, I might upload content as well for practice. But you can also use these as a means to just get exposure to the language on a day-to-day basis. Another great one is community. So you have to have some kind of a community. Social media is a great way to get that accountability, especially if you decide, I'm going to post something every week on my brand new Instagram account. I'm going to post a video of me speaking in that language. That's very useful. You can also just tell your friends and family, share an update on like your Facebook status or something, and say, hey, everyone, I've decided on learning Spanish. then they will check in on you and you'll have that accountability. So on the days where you feel lazy and you're feeling like, oh, maybe I won't do anything today, you'll remember, oh, I promised on Facebook, and that guy I've got a crush on, he knows I'm learning Spanish. So if I let him down, then I don't know what's going to happen. So you have this extra social pressure that's great. So friends and family, tell them that you're all learning the language, and that'll make a big difference. And you can also use them to help motivate you. Like maybe a family member speaks a language and you want to learn to be able to surprise them and speak to them. And like I said, we have the Fluent in 3 months challenge. And within that, we actually have a community of coaches that help people and motivate them to learn the language. So yeah, I'll just talk very briefly about for a couple of minutes about the challenge. I want to make sure you guys know about that. And then I want to talk about the resources, and I will have time to go through all of your questions. So I'm making sure we can check that out. But very briefly, the challenge, if you guys wanted to have any guidance on this, here's just an example of a couple of people I've helped real quick.
To me, you teach bravery. It wasn't too long ago that I first heard your message. Before that, I had believed that I would not be able to learn languages because I didn't have that gene and my brain didn't work properly. And due to that, I wasn't speaking French with my kids. Maintenant, je parle français avec mes enfants. Et I think, especially Frankie, she's going to learn French. And that is a wonderful thing. Thank you so much.
Hi, Benny. This is Tiffany. I wanted to just say something nice about you real quick. For me, I've always loved your videos because you help me to not be afraid to make mistakes. And so it's just really been awesome. So I just want to thank you and say you've taught me a lot.
To me, you teach how to show up and enjoy every situation that you find yourself in.
I take all of your courses. I think you're just such an inspiration. And because
Anyway, this video is on for a while, so I won't bore you guys with all the testimonials and whatever. But we try in the Fluent in 3 months challenge to solve these 3 problems. So the approach, we help people because we got my coach, Shannon, who guides people on the actual process. And she and I have worked together for a very long time. We help people with the precision and the lack of direction, because we have the goal of a 15-minute conversation within 90 days. And we get people to upload a video every 30 days. And this is the theme of what my blog helped me do. Is my blog was around consistent updates. So whether you do this in my challenge or you do this on your own, try to have like an updated scale of how you're doing along this process. And yeah, we aim for 15 minutes. We give people 90 days to do that. The accountability is that we have this great community of people who are learning with you. So you see the mistakes they're making and you learn along with them. And of course, you have to update our coaches on how you're doing. So we kind of emulate that. And when people upload, we actually have like at this stage over 10,000 videos on YouTube of other people who upload. This is where I am at 30 days. This is where I am at 60 days. And this is something I'm very proud of, that I've made a big difference on individual language learner stories. So I did want to share that with you guys very quick. That is the Fluent in 3 months challenge. You can check that out at fluent3months.com/challenge. So just wanted to talk about that very, very quickly. We got a bunch of other stuff that's included in it. And now I want to talk about just a long list of resources. So here's just some things that you guys can check out. And when I'm done with these resources, I'm going to look at all your questions then. So for speaking and pronunciation, italki is probably my favorite site, because this is what connects me with actual natives. And I schedule lessons with them multiple times a week. And I do this before I go to the country, so that when I arrive in the country, I already hit the ground running and I have momentum in my language. Preply is an alternative to italki. Sometimes the teachers might be a bit more affordable on that side, or they have different time availabilities. So these are 2 alternatives to one another. Forvo is good if you don't know the pronunciation of a particular word. You look it up there, and there are like millions of audio files of actual natives. This isn't the automatic AI stuff. Actual native people who speak aloud some words. So if you're not 100% sure on how to pronounce things, check that out. Hello Talk is an app that'll connect you with native speakers. And this is a good way to get a conversation exchange. So there's loads of people on Hello Talk who might want to learn your mother tongue. There are people in China or Brazil who are learning English, or many other countries. You would connect to them on this app, and then you wouldn't even have to spend any money. And you like decide, I'm going to have a call once a week where we'll speak in English for 30 minutes and your language for 30 minutes. So yeah, we got Conversation Exchange, which is a website that has a similar concept. Speakly is another one. So those were resources for like the speaking and pronunciation. Next, for listening, Innovative Language Podcasts. If you do a search on my blog, Fluent in 3 Months podcast, we list our favorite podcasts per language. And these are great resources that will connect you to people's episodes of podcasts that are made for learners. So rather than listening to native content, which would be very intimidating, these are podcasts where they speak slowly and they sometimes translate things in straightforward ways. So I like that. Do a search, Fluent in 3 Months podcast. You'll see the language of your choice. Glossica is done by a friend of mine. This is a more listening-based approach where he has loads of native content that you listen to learn the language. Rhino Spike has example content that you can request. TuneIn Radio is a good one. This is a free resource to listen to any live streamed radio station from anywhere in the world. So if you're learning a specific dialect, then you can go to that country and find radio stations where they're speaking in the language in that country. And, you know, because we can listen to most radio stations for free, but this is a good catalog to find those. I think somebody needs to mute their mic there. YouTube is very good. So we have in the YouTube settings, you can change your country, you can change your preferred language. And then, of course, we've loads of content on YouTube that you could spend days and days watching. So definitely think of that. Now, for listening and reading, my favorite resource is Link, Lingq. This imports texts that you can read and start to note the vocabulary that you find most difficult. And rather than having a new tab open on another window, you click the word for its translation. So very quick and easy way. Audible has loads of books in your target language, and then some resources for vocabulary. Google Images is good because one way we want to stop ourselves thinking in the language is if I see the word voiture in French, I don't necessarily want to look up the translation because then I'm going to be thinking through translations. I would go to Google Images, I would search voiture, and I would see that thing with the 4 wheels. And it's the C word, not that C word, get your mind out of the gutter. It's the C word for the thing with the 4 wheels. And I don't want to say that word because I want to think of the concept that is what I'm going to connect. So I like Google Images to get me out of thinking through translations. Anki, A-N-K-I, is my favorite app for flashcards. It's free on Android and it's paid on iPhone and it's free on your computer. And it synchronizes between your computer and your smart device. You import specific decks that you want to study, and it uses a special algorithm called spaced repetition system that spaces out the vocabulary and only repeats it to you just before you are likely to forget it. So this is how I study all my vocabulary. Memrise is another one that presents you like pre-made words that you can remember. Sometimes it has mnemonics. Link I've already mentioned for vocabulary. Muscle Lingua is a kind of a course-based thing that has vocabulary. Drops is a really fun gamified app for learning a ton of vocabulary. They've got good visuals. You can keep your streak up on the app. Whenever someone wants one easy app, rather than Duolingo, I usually recommend Drops instead. Reverso is a good dictionary that gives you the words in the context. So rather than just seeing like a word for word translation, you'll see examples of that word used in official documentation. The gold list method is a specific type that you can look into for learning vocabulary. And you can do extensive reading. Whenever you read a lot, you're going to absorb lots of words. And the last little list of resources are sentences. Duolingo is good for sentences. It has a lot of random sentences, so I never tell people it's the best resource, but it is one resource you can add to your arsenal. Closemaster is good for training you on sentences. Lyrics training will, this is one word, it's a site. It'll take popular music in the language and it'll play a little piece of it and it'll leave gaps for some of the vocabulary and you have to guess the word. So it's good for training your ear to recognize words in the context of singing. High Native is a good one if you want feedback. So I always start a language off by trying to give like a script prepared about myself. So I'm Benny from Ireland. I'm learning this language because I want to travel to your country. I'm a writer. All these basic things about myself. I might share them on High Native, and then I will get feedback on my grammar through that site. So you can write very brief sentences and get free feedback. And you can journal in your target language as well. Like it's a very good practice at the end of your day. Just write how you're doing and you'll get that practice. I do have more. Zero to Hero for finding content in your language. My blog, I got loads of stuff. I've been writing on that blog for 13 years. So definitely look into that. There's a very strong language learning community on multiple different social media sites and streaming platforms like Netflix and Amazon Prime and all those have content you can watch in your target language. I already mentioned YouTube. So yeah, I think someone said that you wanted to maybe write some of these down. So while I'm answering your questions, I'll give you guys a chance to, I'll leave this on screen. I'll change to the next one while I dive into your questions. But otherwise, thank you for watching, everybody. Again, if you want my help with your project, go to fluentin3months.com/challenge. And that's how you'll get, my team will coach you on all of this. But otherwise, I hope all of this has helped to give you some food for thought. And as I'm answering your questions, I'll flick through some of these resources. So Laura, if you want to take it over and start sharing those questions with me.
Yes, you've got it. Oh my gosh. First of all, amazing. I cannot believe how much you have done and all these resources you are sharing with us. So I really hope everyone can go out and start doing this. I know I'm definitely inspired to go figure out what language I want to learn, but I've loved hearing where everyone, what they were thinking about, what language to speak, and that you show us it's possible. So thank you. You're definitely a huge inspiration. And I'm sure you can see all that in the comments too from everyone. We've got a lot of questions, but before I ask the questions, can you mention real quick what you have coming up in case people are in these areas that you might be traveling to?
Yeah, let me bring up the map again. So I will be, and again, a lot of these are on the Nomadic network. I'm doing a Route 66 trip. So I'm in Austin at the moment, and I'm actually going to go, even though Memphis is my destination for TravelCon, I'm actually going to go to the wrong direction. I'm going to go up to the panhandle of Texas because this is the midpoint of Route 66. And then I'll drive into Oklahoma City. So anyone from Oklahoma City, definitely look out for me. I will be there in 2 weeks' time. And then I'll move on and be in St. Louis. And I'll be there for several days as well. I'll be in Memphis for anyone who's there during TravelCon. I'll be in Little Rock, Arkansas. I'll go down to Dallas for 3 or 4 days as well. I'll do another event there. And then in June, I'll have my travels go back up through Dallas and Oklahoma. I'll be in potentially Wichita and Kansas. And then I'm not sure the exact cities, but I know I'll be in Nebraska, probably Omaha. I'll be in South and North Dakota. I'll be in Montana, and I'll make my way. So I'll be all these places. I'll have the exact destination soon enough. And then I'll end up in Portland, Oregon. And then I fly from Portland through Toronto. I'll be there just for 1 evening. And then I fly down to Brazil and I'll spend 3 months in Brazil. So that is my current travel plan.
Amazing. All right. I think we all need to do a meetup in Brazil then. That's where we should all go. So yeah, everyone, I put that in the comments. You can just click on those links, but you can also go to our calendar of events, and we have some of those locations up, but we're going to add a lot more. So you can always check out to find out where Benny is. And if he's coming near you, you can join him. Okay. So we've got a lot of questions. So I'm just going to ask away. So the first one we had come in from Susie. She's curious, how do you keep the similar languages straight and not become confused with them?
Yeah, very good question. So when I first started getting into languages, I did mix up my languages and I kind of forgot the previous ones I had learned. And especially when they were similar, because I started with Romance languages. And what I found I needed to do was two things. Firstly, I needed to get into a maintenance system with my languages. So I needed to find a way to, essentially I needed to set aside time that I'm not learning a new language. This time is for me to maintain all my languages. So when I say fluent in 3 months, that does not mean every 3 months I'm learning a new language. Generally, I would only learn 1 or 2 languages a year. And then at least 6 months out of the year, I'm consistently switching between my languages. So I'm going to be using, maybe for Monday and Tuesday, I'll use this language. Wednesday, Thursday, I'll use that language, whatever happens to work with the number of languages. So that is one thing you need to do, is to maintain them as their own separate project. The other thing you need to do is they need to be pushed to a high level. A big mistake I see a lot of people have when they're getting into learning multiple languages is they think, okay, I'll learn Spanish and French at the same time. And, maybe you can do that. If you're smarter than me, maybe you can do that. I can't do that. I cannot learn multiple languages at once, because at the beginner levels, they are going to interfere with one another. The only way I've become a polyglot is by exclusively putting all of my attention on one language until I get it to that B2 level, that chart I showed you where it is fluent. When you're genuinely fluent and you feel like you can have natural conversations in social situations, the language is so strong in your mind, it's like you've built a wall around it, and it's a lot more difficult to get interference from other languages. Whereas when you're a beginner in the language, everything is going to interfere with it. So even if your dream is, I would love to speak like 3 languages, that's great. Do not do all 3 right now. Take it one at a time. Doesn't have to be intensively over 3 months. Maybe you might take a whole year or so. If it's your first language you're truly getting into, that you'll have multiple intensive projects, because you still have to have short-term goals. We can have one 3-month project and another 3-month project, but push it and keep pushing it until it's fluent. And then when you start the next language, you can pause that language and you won't lose that much of it. So that is what I would say for people who want to not mix up languages.
Okay, I love that. That is great for all those motivational folks out there. I will just do one at a time for sure. Okay, so we have actually quite a few questions on people who wanted to know how long they should spend each day or each week to learn this language. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, but ultimately, when you are serious about this, you have to make sacrifices. So during my intensive language projects, I decide that for the next 3 months, I'm not going to watch TV in English. Like maybe there's a show I really, really love. I'm just going to accept I'm not going to watch it for the next 3 months. And maybe I'm a social guy and I like going down to the pub with my friends every Friday, Saturday night. I'm going to decide I'm going to limit that to just, once every 2 or 3 weeks, because I need to make time. I need to find ways that I'm bleeding out time that could be put into languages. I'm going to make sacrifices, which you can do in the short term. It's going to be a little energy draining, but I find every moment I can possibly squeeze out of my day, because there's no right answer. It's not like I can tell you 2 hours is the magic number. It's very simply something I referred to earlier, that it's not about the number of months, it's about the number of hours. So if somebody tells me I've been studying Spanish for 5 years, I don't really, to be honest, I don't really care. I want to know how many hours have you spent studying Spanish. So if you're able to make these sacrifices, the more time you're able to put in on a day-to-day basis, the better. And 1 hour is minimum if you want to be making any true progress. Like a lot of people would just get out Duolingo and do that for 10 minutes and feel like they're doing something. To be honest, it's barely better than nothing. It needs to be an intensive process. It's going to be difficult. You're going to have actual points in your calendar where you're having spoken lessons with a teacher or some kind of an exchange situation. But yeah, 1 hour is a minimum, but the more hours you can put in, the faster over those months you're going to be making progress in that language.
Okay, that's perfect. And actually, that kind of leads into another question, which you sort of answered, but someone was asking about Duolingo and they were using that, but they've learned the language very slowly. And so they're curious, how useful do you think Duolingo is actually?
Duolingo is like, if you're using 20 resources, it would be the 20th that I would say. Like, for people who Duolingo is their main resource for learning a language, you are wasting your time. Now, it doesn't mean Duolingo is bad. I could, like, there's people on my team who are much more accomplished than I am, who speak multiple languages, and they use Duolingo. But the difference is, it is a minor contributing point of their language learning. It's mainly just when they're in a supermarket line and they got 2 minutes to kill, then they'll take out their app and they'll click through Duolingo a little bit. But you have to do something that is unfortunately going to be more intensive and more draining. And Duolingo, it's fun. It's a gamified system. They give you trophies and there's a funny owl that will chase you and all this stuff, which is great, but it's not actually helping you to make significant strides in the language. And I even know the founder of Duolingo. I've interviewed him in Spanish on my YouTube channel. So like, I know the guy, but I still think, you have to do more difficult things as your priority. And then it's fine if Duolingo is like your 6th or 7th thing that you're using, but it definitely is never in my top 3 list of resources that I would recommend.
Okay, great. And thank you for your honesty on that too, because I feel like that's one of the popular ones you hear about that people use. So it's good just to have your insight on that. We had another question kind of around that, but it's called the Michelle, I guess, Thomas method.
Yeah, Michelle Thomas. So
Michelle Thomas, yeah.
My publisher of my language hacking books, these ones here, it's the same publisher as actually Charles Darwin's Theory of Evolution, John Murray, and they own Michelle Thomas. And he had a very good approach where he would speak to people in private sessions, and you essentially listen to those lessons, and that would boost you up a little bit. But now, ultimately, like, people could ask you all sorts of things. They could say, do you recommend this? Do you recommend that? And ultimately, there is no one resource. I mean, obviously, apart from my book is the be all end all. But, realistically, there is no one resource that will actually solve all your language learning problems. So if there are more questions, should I use this? I've heard this is good. Then maybe check it out, try it for yourself, see if you're making any significant progress. But ultimately, these are tertiary. The main resource you need to use is a human being. You have to speak the language to somebody, and the easiest way to do that is through italki or Preply, to connect with a teacher that you pay for, that they can be very affordable. If you need Spanish lessons, find someone in Colombia. They'll very happily do it for $10 an hour, and they'll be a very good experienced teacher. Maybe there are people nearby who can do it. So in terms of resources, there are no perfect resources. This is why I listed a bunch of them there. Test them out, see if you like them. But the main thing has to be speaking the language.
I love that. And then, I mean, when you get to meet these people, then you have a new friend too, and you get to learn a little bit about them and them. It's awesome. So love that tip. Okay. Rachel had a question about the CEFR, that test that you had. Is there a free version or a free level test to figure out when you can check your progress at where you might be?
So it depends on the language, but if you do a quick search for CEFR, and you'll see a Wikipedia article that lists each of the institutions. So for instance, for French, it's the Alliance Française. And for Spanish, it's the Instituto Cervantes. And for German, it's Goethe-Institut. So you have each one of these different corporations, and some of them have mock exams that you can just download and do for yourself. But these exams, they're generally $400 or $500. So it's not something necessarily I tell people they have to do. I mainly use the scale as a good idea of where you're aiming for. Generally, I would only sit those exams if you really need to have on your resume proof that you speak the language at the level you claim. Or if you want to study in university, then they require you to take these exams. But generally, I would just see if there are mock exams. And if I want to know I'm at that level, I would just get one of my italki teachers and ask them. I would like have a session with them. And at the end of the session, I'd say, so what level do you think I'm at? And they may say, I think you're a B1 right now. And because a lot of these teachers have an understanding of these like learning systems, they can just tell you, and it's the price of one lesson. But you can also take a mock exam. They might have some they can recommend for you, or the official websites may recommend them, and you can just download them, do them on your free time. It's not necessary to pay the several hundreds of dollars to do it, unless you really need that like on your resume.
Okay, makes sense. It's perfect. All right, we've got a few more questions. We have had so many questions come in. This is amazing. So thank you, everyone, for all these questions. All right, I love this one. So Don had a question about how do you account for the different accents in the different countries? For example, with Spanish. So the accent in Chile might be different than in Spain, or even in the different regions of Spain. So how do you handle that?
Okay, so dialects and accents are an interesting one. Basically, as a beginner learner in the language, it's not something you need to care that much about. This kind of is a temptation of perfectionism to me, that somebody gets too obsessed with one particular dialect. So if you know you're going to Chile, the problem is Chilean Spanish can be a little tricky. There's like they tend to eat a lot of their consonants at the end of words. So it is a harder version to learn. And this is why it might be easier if you learn a standard version of Spanish. So there is no one standard version, but if you're in Europe, they tend to give you European peninsular Spanish as your like main course. If you're in North America, it tends to be Mexican Spanish. And these are fine because like 99% of the content is the same. It's the same way as like people who tend to have learned American English, who then move to Ireland, even though they're not native English speakers, they get by fine. Like they have to learn a couple of words after a while. But generally, my process with dialects is I will leave them until the intermediate stages. So I can switch between Spanish dialects. I've lived in Spain for almost 2 years. I've been in Argentina 3 months, Peru 3 months, Colombia 4 months, Mexico 2 months. And to a certain degree, I can remember when a slang expression is unique to Mexico or whatever it may be. And that's more useful to me now because I also like to think of this as through the Pareto principle. What's the 20% of the work that I can do right now that's going to give me 80% of the results? And worrying about whether I have to say coche or carro is not something I need to be too stressed about, because if I say coche in Latin America, in countries where they're not used to hearing that word for car, they still know what I mean. The same way when Americans say eggplant, I know what you mean. You know, it's not something I would say, but I understand that. So it's fine if you, as a beginner, learn some standard version of the language, but then later on, it's a lot easier because it's less work to just worry about the dialectal differences. So I've done this, for instance, with my French. I focused on Parisian French for the majority of my learning. And then when I spoke French fluently, I moved to Montreal. And then I learned Joual, which is their kind of dialect of French that they speak in Quebec. And I was able to learn that quickly because I already spoke French. I didn't have to learn basic conjugations and, you know, vocabulary that I was going to have to learn anyway. It's a lot easier to learn these things when you already have a high level of the language. So that's what I would recommend.
Okay, perfect. All right. So I just had a quick question I wanted to ask for myself. So what is the language that you want to learn next?
Well, it's not necessarily a new language that I want to learn, but because in Brazil, I am going to be giving a book tour, I'm going to have to be speaking on stage in Portuguese, which I haven't done before. I've had an interesting use of my Portuguese in many social situations, but I've never had to like present to people. I've never had to like be interviewed on the radio in Portuguese. So I'm taking very intensive lessons right now to push my already, it's probably on that scale at like a C1 level. I need it to be C2 if I want to be able to present my book. And that requires completely different things to what I would do at the beginning stages. So my teachers is giving me very difficult lessons, and I have to listen to people talking very quickly who like slur their words. And I have to listen to stand-up comedians, which is so hard in another language. And that is what my current project is to push my Portuguese to a truly professional level so I can speak on stage in it.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, and the comedians, I bet, just because the slang and just the different terms that they're going to use, wow, that's tough. All right, we've got a lot more questions, so hopefully you have a little bit more time.
Yeah, keep them coming.
All right, so this one maybe is a little bit more personal, so you don't have to answer it if you don't want, but one person was saying that their fastest way they learned to speak a new language was to date someone who spoke that language. So have you ever done that?
It is an interesting approach, and the thing you keep in mind is if you're filling your day by interacting with somebody who will speak to you in that language, that is better than anything else. So as long as the person you're dating doesn't want to learn your mother tongue, because I've fallen into that trap where I started dating someone and then I realized very quickly that they kind of were using me to try to eventually get English practice. And, you kind of have to be clear about that from the get-go. But of course, if that's something open to somebody, I would recommend it. And I'm a single guy, so you can bet I plan to do a bit of dating when I'm in Brazil. But it's not necessarily as different from just having an active social life, essentially.
Right. Got it. Okay. Jill had a question on what's your experience with coaching those that might have aging brains, so to speak. So are there different methods like that you might learn in your younger years versus what you might learn as you're a little bit older?
So I have people who join my challenge who are in their 70s. There's actually a YouTuber named Steve Kaufman. He's the guy who founded Link, and I think he's almost 80, and he's always learning new languages. So ultimately, you have to ask yourself, are you using age as an excuse? So I know that for a lot of people, they imagine that young people have like sponges for brains, and it's better to be young, and children learn languages better than adults. This is blatantly false, believe it or not. There is a study done at the University of Haifa in Israel, and they found that under the right circumstances, adults are better language learners than children. What comes into question is the actual method that they're using. Children, 99.9% of the time, are just using better learning methods because they're playing games in the language. They have friends in the language. They're not opening dusty old grammar books to study for hours. They're actually living the language. So that's why they tend to learn it better. So the older you are, it's more a case of we've gotten into patterns that we don't like to change our lifestyle as much. And those are the kind of patterns that you have to fight. But your age, unless you have something like Alzheimer's, you can't use your age as an excuse for why you're not able to learn the language. And I have seen countless exceptions to young people are better at languages by all these people who I've coached and helped to learn the language. And everything I tell them is essentially the same as what I tell people who are in their 20s, is just to live through that language and find ways to enrich their life by using a language on a day-to-day basis. And the advice doesn't really change after that.
Love it. I got it. Perfect. You just got to do it no matter what age you are. If you're motivated, do it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Lisa has a question about, I think you mentioned you have an engineering background. And so she's curious if you've found that any of the skills from like that engineering brain side of you helps with the language learning. And then kind of on the flip side, as going so in depth, learning the language, has that helped with any other thought processes that you might have, like your habits, behaviors? So two-part question.
Okay. So for the first part, in terms of initially it worked against me because I thought there was a whole left brain, right brain thing happening where you're either good at technical things, and I am good at technical things. I've been a mathematics teacher earlier in my life. So I would imagine that because of that, I would necessarily be bad at the arts. So I didn't do that great in English as a subject in school or in languages. And I just imagined, that's who I am. So it worked a little bit against me. But when I pushed back against these misconceptions and I really pushed myself into it. What I found was engineers, we distinguish ourselves from scientists by being practical. So in science, whenever you're looking into theories of things, you always have these ideal situations where, you know, I don't know, things are not lost to friction. There's no heat loss. But when you're building a bridge, you have to accept you live in a frustrating real world that is going to try to take your bridge down. And you can't say presuming under ideal conditions. So I've taken this into my language learning, and this engineering has kind of implemented an anti-perfectionism mentality for me, which has been extremely beneficial because I'm very practical, and the engineer in me is practical about that. So I don't think to myself, I need to speak this language perfectly. I think to myself, I need to communicate. That involves me butchering this language right now. That's okay because the goal is communication. So yeah, I would say that is how the engineering side has helped me. In terms of how languages have helped me the opposite direction, I would say I was not particularly outgoing when I first started traveling. And the thing about speaking a language as a beginner is you do embrace the fact that you sound like an idiot. You do embrace this fact that you have to walk up to these people and, like, you know, you take that deep breath and then you just have to say the words knowing you have a weird accent and you're going to mess up. And this has done wonders for my self-confidence because now I'm so much more outgoing because learning a language as a beginner in these ways that I'm trying to produce the language has transformed me as a person. It wouldn't have done that if I was just into languages in general. I just liked studying languages. But this has forced me to get out of my comfort zone and to approach people and talk to them and be okay with, you know, I don't think so much now that people are judging me. When I first started traveling, I imagine everyone thinks I'm a moron. They're going to be thinking, why am I walking up to them? Why am I speaking to them? But now I just kind of embrace the fact, you know what, I sound like an idiot anyway, may as well just speak. And I'm confident even in non-language situations because of that.
Yeah, I love it. And I think anywhere you go, people are going to be so happy that you're at least trying. And I mean, I put it in my perspective. If I speak English, if someone didn't speak English and they were trying, I will love that. And I will try to help them and answer their questions as best as I can. So I think, yeah, you just got to get out of your mind and out of your head and just have that confidence and go for it. Who cares? It doesn't matter. But it's hard for people. I know. You just got to try. All right. Another question on how does one go through managing a conversation when you might not remember that particular word? You pull out Google Translate, a dictionary. Have you handled that before?
So one of the more ridiculous projects that I've had is I was invited to give a TEDx talk in Warsaw, and it was kind of last minute and I didn't speak any Polish. So I gave myself the challenge of seeing how much Polish can I learn in 1 hour. And so I crammed a phrase book. I was in Berlin at the time. I only had to get a train in. So my phrase book was actually German to Polish, but I spoke German, so it didn't matter as much. And when at the end of cramming for half an hour this phrase book, I had a session with a teacher in Polish. So the way I did it was I did have a tab open on Google Translate, and I learned ahead of time. I just had like a quick notepad app open, and I learned ahead of time how to say, "Could you write that, please?" And so the teacher started the lesson. They were like, "Benny, blah, 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 blah." And I looked at and I was like, said in Polish, "Could you write that, please?" And they typed it into the chat window, and I copy and pasted that to Google Translate. And I also learned to say one moment. And I just had to they had to wait for me. I was paying them. So I felt less embarrassed by it because I pay tutors to have to deal with the hesitations just as much to have to deal with my bad speaking. And I would say, okay, they asked, "Oh, where are you from?" And I was like, "Okay, I am from Ireland." And I typed into Google Translate and I read it back to them in the session. So this was me cheating using Google Translate. You can also, in the moment, you can look up the words on good dictionaries. My favorite dictionary is Word Reference. This has many, many different languages, and it's very good for the main ones people tend to use it for. And otherwise, I would just ask my teacher. I try to avoid English, though, especially because sometimes I'll have a teacher who just simply doesn't speak English. excuse me, and I will ask them, oh, okay, I'm thinking of the word for supermarket. So you know that place you go, you buy food, and they'll be like, restaurant? No, 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 you buy food and other things, and you just work your way through it like that. And it can be frustrating, but it forces you to have to do it in that language like you would in the country. So that's a couple of tips I would give for that.
I love that. And it's true. I mean, I think for me, Spanish, that's kind of what I know, but you're right. I've got those two phrases, un momento and más despacio, because I need that time to figure it out. And so as long as you're trying, I think they'll be understanding of that.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right. So we had a question come in. I think someone's interested in learning French and they're curious, where would be a cheap French country to maybe go and learn French?
Yeah, like whenever I tell people to find teachers on sites like italki, they would get back to me and say, yeah, but French teachers are quite expensive because, the euro is a strong currency. So it's hard to get somebody at least with good experience. But there are so many French speaking countries, especially in Africa. So you may find a teacher from Senegal or from Tunisia who speaks French as their first language or is bilingual with French and another language, who's extremely affordable. They'll have a slightly different accent, but they are very much aware of how to tailor their French for people who want to learn like standard European French. So I would recommend people to look into teachers from French-speaking African countries, and you would be very surprised. They do have a particularly noticeable accent, but other than that, they will help you with European French just as well.
Okay, perfect. All right. And then I think this might be our last question. I think I got to them all. If I missed you, just write it down in the chat box, or you can always reach out to Benny. And I just gave all the information there on how to contact him. So Rachel had a question about, have you had success piggybacking on similar languages? For example, when she was in Brazil, she looked for lots of similar Spanish words to communicate with people.
Yeah, and obviously when you have one language that's very similar, your workload is a lot lower. One thing I would recommend in that situation, though, is to do something we like to think of as, it's called laddering. So I would actually find, if your Spanish is very good, I would find a book in Spanish about learning Portuguese. And this way, it very much hones in on what is different. And you would learn things like, instead of saying más grande, you can't just translate that word for word to Portuguese and say mais grande. You have to say maior, because that's how they say it in Portuguese. So before going to Brazil, I got a book in Spanish on learning Portuguese. And actually, I use this intentionally a lot of the times because I get out of my mindset of English by using resources in other languages. So because French is one of my better languages, typically one of the first books that I get in a language is actually Assimil. Assimil has their own language courses that are mainly in French, and I use the French course to teach me whatever it might be, Arabic or Chinese or something. And I find that very beneficial. But yeah, when you're starting off in a course, try to find resources through one language. I've also seen loads of people on social media. There are TikTok accounts of Spanish speakers who are learning Portuguese and vice versa. And if you follow them, they'll give you the lowdown of the most common mistakes that people tend to make, and that can give you a big leg up.
All right, perfect. All right, and we got a couple more questions. We just love it. There's so many questions coming in for you because you are just a wealth of knowledge. So Danielle had a question about, what language have you found that has been the most useful?
Yeah, this question is an interesting one because people imagine like, what should I learn? Should I learn Spanish because, it's the one that's taught the most? Should I learn Chinese because there are more people who speak it? Ultimately, it depends on you. So like for me, the Irish language, Gaeilge, has been very useful because it's helped me connect to my family and my home country a lot more. But obviously it's a very small language, so I can't recommend that to everybody. So it depends on your situation. I would never say one language is inherently more useful than another. But one thing I will say, just for food for thought for people, is if you are new to language learning, a very weird suggestion I have for you is to consider learning Esperanto as your first foreign language. This is an artificial language that was intentionally made to be the world's easiest language. And they've done some studies where they found that people, I believe they were in the Netherlands, a bunch of teenagers, and one group learned French for 2 years, another group learned Esperanto for 1 year, and then French for 1 year. So they learned less French, but they did better in their French exams. And it's because they started with Esperanto, they got into the process of learning a language, and they got over their lack of confidence and all these other issues we're going to face no matter what language it is. And then they had the momentum that when they switched to French, they actually were making way better progress than the other group. So it's a kind of a random advice, especially to people into travel, because you can't go to Esperanto land, but it's just a weird little extra language that has turned out to be useful in helping me understand languages in general.
It's amazing. I've never heard of that. Okay, I think we all need to pitch in, buy an island somewhere, and have that be that Esperanto language country or whatever.
Oh yeah, I'm down for that. Yeah.
Right? How fun would that be? Okay, a couple more questions keep coming in. So someone's curious about what you think about Babbel and Lingo.
Yeah, no, I'm going to defer back to what I said previously, that you can list what you think of this, what you think of that. They are all good in their own senses. Some of them have advantages and disadvantages. There is no one best resource. So if you look at their pages that describe them, you'll see what they're offering and if they come ahead for you. But there's no course that I can't tell you what I think of. There's hundreds of courses that I could tell you are good or bad. And at this stage, I just use whatever is available to me.
Yeah, that works. Yeah, that's perfect. And everyone's going to be different. You're going to find what works best for you as a person. All right. So this is our last question. So Lisa was curious, you mentioned Google Images in the resource list. Can you speak to that again?
Yeah. So the example I gave was if you are presented with a word and you don't know what it means, Google Images is one way to avoid thinking through translations. So we tend to look up that word and see what it is in English, and then your work is done. Whereas to help me not keep thinking through English and constantly translate in my mind, I would search for the word in Google Images, and then I'll see the concept and I can avoid thinking of that English word. Another thing that I do that also helps me with this is instead of getting a bilingual dictionary, so a dictionary between the language and English, I would find a monolingual dictionary. And it's a lot easier if you're in the country. Like while I was in Spain, I just found a Spanish dictionary that would give me definitions. So if I see coche, it would just tell me the thing with the 4 wheels that you drive and transports you. And I'd be like, okay, I get it. And I don't think of the word car because I don't want to be doing that in the long run, to be constantly thinking through English. So Google Images, I mentioned that as a resource because you just punch the word. It depends on the word, if it's a like a philosophical concept, it's a lot harder to visualize. But for a lot of nouns, they are very easy to you'll see the thing and you'll know what it means. So it gives you that extra advantage. So yeah, I'm glad I was able to answer everybody's questions. I hope you found that useful. You can see here all of my own personal links. And like I said, the challenge is where I'll be coaching if you want me to help you with that. But otherwise, I got social media you can follow and my own podcast. So check me out and maybe I'll bump into you on one of these upcoming trips that I got.
Yes, definitely. And that's a perfect segue. I know we are way over time, but just give me 1 or 2 more minutes. I'm just going to share what we have coming up. But Benny, oh my goodness, this